picture this. You start your Monday absolutely ready to crush your week. You feel great. You lift. You feel so accomplished. And you're like, fuck yeah, the rest of this week is going to be amazing. And then life happens. You don't sleep very well, or you're extra stressed because of work. And life is just lifing. By the end of the week, you're sort of wondering if you've been hit by a small bus and you just didn't realize it. That roller coaster is super common, and we might even say kind of normal when you're in your 40s or in this midlife period of time. But the trick with training isn't to just try harder and push through it no matter what. On this episode, I'm letting you in on the strategy that I use with my lifters and personally with myself to stay consistent and ultimately get better results from the training that you're doing in the long run. If you're an athletic 40-something woman who loves lifting weights, challenging yourself, and doing hard shit, the Fuel Your Strength podcast is for you. You'll learn how to eat, train, and recover smarter so you build strength and muscle, have more energy, and perform better in and out of the gym. I'm strength nutrition strategist and weightlifting coach, Steph. The Fuel Your Strength podcast dives into evidence-based strategies for nutrition, training, and recovery, and why, once you're approaching your 40s and beyond, you need to do things a little differently than you did in your 20s. We're here to challenge the limiting industry narratives about what women can and should do in training and beyond. If that sounds good, hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and let's go. What's going on? Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here with me today on this episode. We're going to be getting into when you're in midlife. There are so many things that are going to pop up and potentially get in the way of your consistent workout schedule, especially if you have goals of increasing your strength, improving your muscle mass, working on power, and training for a sport, even if you're a hobbyist. How do you deal with this without it completely knocking you off your game? This is something that so many of my lifters struggle with when they first come in to work with me in Strong with Steph. And it's something that I use even with myself in order to moderate my training based on how I'm feeling. Because let's be real, at this time of life, we have tons of things vying for our attention. We have lots of unexpected things that can pop up, responsibilities, child caring for older adult family members, work shit, the state of the world, perimenopause, menopause, etc. There's a lot going on. So how do we stay consistent in times where all of the unexpected things are popping up and kind of coming at us full speed? That's what we're going to get into on this episode. Now, before we dive in, if you want to just know what to do when you get in the gym so you don't have to think about putting all of the pieces of a training plan together so that you can be more consistent, then go ahead and check out my free 7-day sample of Strong with Steph. You can get that at stephgaudreau.com/workout. All right, so let's set up some backstory here. And I'm just going to say this because I'm feeling a little bit spicy today. Recently, I had somebody comment on one of my episodes that I was explaining things too much before getting into the episode. And I was like, that's why the fuck we're here. We're here to provide context. We're here to provide coaching, things that are going deeper than you're going to see on a 3-second reel or TikTok or something. That's what this podcast is for. This podcast is for discussion. And if I were not framing the conversation for you, then I would not be doing my job, because I'm not giving you all of the context and all of the nuance that's required to really tell you, hey, these are the things that I'm seeing with my lifters, with my clients. These are the things that I've also seen in myself as a hobbyist athlete over 40. This is how we're dealing with it. And so, hey, if you're looking for just a quick little 3-second thing, then this podcast is probably not for you. I try to keep it succinct as I can, while balancing that against fleshing out the story. That's why we're here. And sometimes the topics may not necessarily be for you, and that's totally okay. it's not going to be possible that I'm going to create a podcast episode that fits exactly what every single person is looking for. So maybe you are good at doing this that we're going to be talking about today, which is what I call riding the wave. Maybe you're great at it and you don't really need this information. So just like either hang out and hear, maybe you do learn something, or, go back and dig through the archives. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. So in Strong with Steph, I tend to have 3 different kinds of lifters. The first are the folks who are pretty new. You have a little bit of weight training experience, but you're really looking to create a super strong foundation, and you're on the novice side. You've touched weights before, but you're looking for more structure. The second type are the people who are used to following a strength training plan, whether it's in a gym or on your own. You've taken time away and you're trying to get back to it. And the third are my hobbyist athletes or my competitive athletes, the people who are really driven to compete. You love the idea of putting yourself out there, even if it's for fun and it's not as serious. You find value in other sports and pursuits outside of lifting that lifting is going to help benefit you. So in and amongst these 3 archetypes of lifters, there is a fairly common thread, and it is people who want to push themselves 100% all of the time. We've sort of internalized this message that lifting, to be beneficial, we have to keep progressing and we have to do high effort sets and really challenge ourselves. But folks that have really internalized this, that every single day needs to be an all-out effort. So if that's you right now, I want to gently call you in here because this episode is very, very relevant to you, especially now that you're over 40, because thinking that every workout needs to be a knockdown, drag out effort. And that's how you end up really exhausted, chronically sore, dealing with all of these nagging injuries. And ultimately, it ends up being really counterproductive, along with the mental, emotional toll that this takes, where you feel like you're never good enough, you're never getting ahead, you're never seeing progress. You should just be able to push hard all of the time. And that stuff ends up being really counterproductive, especially in this time of life where we've already mentioned things can be more unpredictable. Your energy, how much capacity reserve you have as you're going through and living life in this time that we're all alive, which is very challenging for a variety of reasons. So if you are the I must go 100% at all times kind of person, this is really for you. And if you're kind of on the flip side of that as well, which is like every day is, it's just overly easy because you're maybe a little bit afraid to put some of those harder efforts forward because you've been told by people on social media, oh, this is going to wreck your cortisol and this is going to make you injured. And it's kind of put you into a state where you're afraid to challenge yourself at all. Those two polar opposites, neither is going to be very, very helpful. So learning to ride the wave, which is modulating your intensity, is very, very important because it allows you to still work toward your overall strength goals and your goals to build muscle. We know that no one workout is going to make all of our progress. And we also know that one workout isn't going to break all of our progress. Even a few workouts isn't going to make or break our progress. It's a cumulative effect. We know that it's going to help us build better overall fitness, especially with cardiovascular efforts, so we can do those harder efforts when we need to. And we know that modulating intensity is going to help us to recover better instead of always running on proverbial fumes. So we're going to take the example in this podcast. I think it would be helpful if we lay out what that looks like, because when I talk about riding the wave, which you can imagine is that when we have ups, we're going to work with that. When we have downs, we're going to let it coast a little bit more, and learning how to do that throughout your week of training so that you're not just trying to do 3, 4, 5 super hard training sessions in a row. And this is what I see when people generally aren't following a program that they're trying to do. They're doing multiple very hard workouts all in a row, and they're wondering why by day 3, 4, etc., they're feeling pretty shit because they're not recovered. Those recovery debts start to stack up. We have less capacity available because of all the other stuff in our life. And so we start to really fall behind in the training quality itself. And then we kind of mentally beat ourselves up for, why can't I just push as hard as I used to? Well, we're not 20 anymore. And if we were doing that when we were 20, then we weren't actually being advised really wisely about training anyway, because we know we're not going to go 110% effort every single day. That just doesn't make sense. So learning to ride the wave, those harder days with easier days, is really, really important because it helps us to maintain a core of structure insofar as setting up our week. We need to have a plan. The people who have a plan, they're following a lifting plan. They generally know how their week is going to be structured out. Maybe there's a plan B, because they're using something like if-then planning, which is a really powerful strategy for setting up, hey, if my plan A doesn't go through, then what are my options? So I can pre-think that. But the people who structure their week out ahead of time, you know what you're doing on what day, when you're going here, when you're going there, when you have pockets of time, when you don't, are the most successful when it comes to following along with a training plan and getting better results. Getting the intended outcome, right? So if you want to build muscle, you want to move more powerfully and athletically, you want to improve at your sport, you want to build your strength, you have goals from your training, then structuring out, having a plan, having a schedule is super, super important. However, people often don't want to follow that because they think, well, what if I don't feel my most energetic that day? Then the whole day is ruined. And I say, not so fast, my friend. This is where the flexibility part that adds on to structure comes in. So structured flexibility. Now that could look like something like following RPE and learning how to auto-regulate your training, which I highly encourage in Strong with Steph. And that's how we program out the lifting in the program, whether that's your cardio efforts, learning, hey, you know what? I'm going to go a little bit easier today, or, hey, actually I feel really good today. So I'm going to put the pedal down and really go for it. No matter what, when we have a plan, we can then introduce some of this riding the wave, right? So that way we know when we can push harder, we know when we need to back off a little bit because we have some idea of how we're feeling. Whether that's I'm completely collecting that data by observation and seeing how I feel, and or maybe I'm using something like a recovery tracker. I'm tracking things like resting heart rate or heart rate variability, those sorts of things that can help me to figure out how recovered do I feel today. So you don't have to track those things, but it can be helpful, especially if you're the type of person who wants to push through every single day and you feel like you're crispy around the edges and like a hot pile of garbage. So we need some kind of a framework. We need some kind of a structure. So that's our training plan. And then we're going to sort of look at what the week could look like and how we would modulate our intensity throughout that week. So we're going to use a fictitious example here of somebody who's doing 2 times a week strength training. Now, before you think, oh, 2 days a week doesn't sound like enough, I need to be doing 5 days a week of strength training. Notice where that idea of doing even more is coming in. And is that sort of old programming, meaning old ideas, incorrect thinking, catastrophizing your thinking, where it's like, if I don't get 5 days a week, I'm not going to get stronger. The fact of the matter is most midlife lifters that I work with that have other jobs and responsibilities and other things going on find that they do really fucking great on 2 to 3 days a week of lifting. And this idea of doing bodybuilding splits And I've talked about this in a recent episode, so I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. But even for some people, 4 days a week in the gym, 5 to 6 days a week in the gym is just not realistic at this time of life. It's just not, especially if you're not trying to be a bodybuilder. So we can get a lot done on 2 to 3 days a week of lifting. Suffice to say, we're going to use this as an example. So here's how, if somebody was doing 2 times a week of lifting and trying to hit the cardio minimum guidelines as well, because we know 2 times a week full body strength training and 150 minutes of moderate intensity cardio a week will hit our exercise minimum guidelines, which most people or a majority of people are not currently getting. If we can get to that point, we're doing fucking great. And if we get beyond it, awesome. But why are we shooting for the moon when we're still firmly planted on the earth? So here we go. 2 times a week of lifting. So let's say we're going to structure that out on a Monday and a Friday. I've got my non-negotiable lifting days. Those are going to be my anchors in the week because I know I really need to get those done, and I'm going to schedule them in. And I want to generally place them as far apart in my week as reasonably can be expected. What I typically don't want to do is say I'm lifting twice a week and I'm going to smash them together back to back. Your second day is just not going to be very good quality. And, sometimes things happen with our second lifting day and it's 3 days later and it's just not the best day, and that's fine. But I would typically not put 2 hard lifting days back to back, even if it's something like an upper lower split, because there is still an energy recovery cost, even if you're flopping body segments here. So upper one day, lower the next. I mean, sometimes we have to do what we have to do. And I've talked about that recently on a podcast about lifting and lifting splits and those sorts of things. So you can go back and check that out. But Monday and Friday, we're going to separate those out as much as we can. Could it be on the Thursday? Yeah, it can. It's fine. It could be Tuesday, Saturday. The point is to just give yourself enough recovery time in between those lifting sessions. So then that leaves us, in our fictitious example, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday on which to place cardio. Now that could also be sport practice or things like that, which can add an element that's challenging depending on how hard the practice is or the class that you're going to. But we're keeping it easy here on this example. And so what we're going to do is assume that most of our cardio will be sort of moderate effort. It's going to be more recoverable and not 5 knockdown, drag out interval sessions where you're barely hanging on and you feel like you're completely fried as fuck. So that gives us some time. If we do want to do maybe one to start off with hard interval session or one harder cardio session. If you're not used to doing hard cardio sessions and you're brand new to cardio, you're not going to start off with 5 times a week doing hard interval sessions. It's just not going to work out very well for you. So build up to it over time, but if you're a brand new beginner, start with more moderate sessions and then you can build from there. But in this example, we're going to use 4 sessions that are more moderate, and we'll say pepper in 1 harder cardio session. Maybe it's a harder tempo session or some intervals, something that's a harder intensity. So we're going to place that in this example in the middle of the week on that Wednesday. And then everything else is going to be more of a moderate effort. And we'll pencil it in and say, ? So maybe I wake up on a Wednesday, which is when we're planning to do this interval session of cardio that's harder. And I'm like, ooh, I am not very well recovered today. I didn't sleep very well. Something is going on at work. I'm really stressed out. And so maybe today isn't the day that I really have it in me to go and run hill sprints. What I can do is pull the intensity of that Wednesday back and then pencil in on Thursday to do my intervals. to go harder. And then Friday, I'm going to lift. So that's how we can learn to start riding the wave, if you will. And so in this example, it was Monday, high intensity lifting. Tuesday, more moderate intensity cardio. Wednesday, higher intensity cardio. Thursday, low to moderate intensity cardio. Friday, higher intensity with lifting. Saturday, we'll call it moderate just for the sake of this example. And then Sunday could be a lower effort day. So I'm still doing something on all of my days, but I'm creating gaps for myself to catch some extra recovery because on the off days from lifting, I've kept most of my cardio more recoverable, but there is freedom and flexibility to shift what I'm doing. And I'll give you a perfect example. So generally speaking for me, and you don't have to do what I do, this is just how I manage and approach my week. I run twice a week, and one of those sessions tends to be a moderate effort, quote unquote, zone 2. Right? I'm out there. You see me. I post on my Instagram stories. I'm out there like singing my favorite songs, just kind of tootling along, enjoying a slower pace. And that's what I do on the Tuesday. On the Thursday, I tend to do my interval run. So these are not all out sprints, but it's also not super easy and more on what we call kind of an aerobic type of interval. So it's hard. They're hard intervals. So I'm pushing myself. I'm challenging myself. Well, because we had been traveling, by Thursday, my recovery was still not great. And I thought, okay, if I go out now and I try to do intervals, I'm just going to put myself further in the hole in terms of recovery and probably not lift all that well tomorrow. So what I did was I pulled the intensity back of that running. I still picked up the pace a little bit, but it was much slower of a pace than I normally would do when I'm out there doing intervals. So I still kept my appointment to myself. I still kept my schedule. And I have had times in the past where my recovery was really not great. And instead of doing any running on that day, I pulled it back and I walked. And so I want you to start thinking about, okay, sure, we can plan out an entire week. Hey, this is our plan A for when we're lifting, and we're going to plan that to be higher intensity. And then here's our cardio sessions, and here's probably when they're going to be moderate. And here's where I have the chance to flex between moderate and high intensity, as the example I just gave you. But also thinking about when I'm lifting, if I'm having an off day, I can still get in and do something moderately hard. Maybe I pull the intensity back. I do less volume, so fewer reps and sets. Maybe I treat it more as a deload day because I'm just really not feeling it. Maybe I take weight off the bar. So I can also do that on my lifting so that I stop skipping entire sessions, right? And so I can think about using auto-regulation in that way, just like I can with my cardio. If I'm feeling really great and I thought, okay, today I was just going to go along and do, kind of tootle along and do a slow bike ride or something like that on the stationary bike. If I wake up and I feel really great, then maybe I can slot some of my intervals into that day and do something a bit more higher intensity, get my heart rate up a little bit. So don't treat this as, okay, this Steph says this is the exact perfect week setup. There are so many different variations of this that I work with my lifters on because many of them are doing extra things beyond lifting. Either they're just trying to figure out how to get cardio into their week with the mixture of activities that they enjoy, or they're also sport hobbyists, or they're prepping for an event. They're going to be running a 10K, or they're going to do a half marathon, or they have a jiu-jitsu competition coming up or something like that. So it doesn't have to look exactly in the way I said, but I think the more you can give yourself options and the more you can stop putting like 3-4 plus hard sessions in a row, you're going to find that you actually perform better when the time does come for you to do higher intensity things in your training. So we have to get out of this mindset that we have to do hard every single day. It has to absolutely smash the shit out of you every day in order for it to be beneficial. That is not the case. It is not how smart training works. Smart training says, okay, we need to pick and choose our harder efforts, everything around it can still be active because we want to accumulate, for example, more cardio minutes in our week or those sorts of things, or we want to go play our sport and have fun or get outside and enjoy nature, whatever that looks like. But we want to pick and choose our hard days and offset them with easier to more moderate days so that we're actually better recovered once the hard days roll around again. And that's going to do things like, in the big picture, reduce your risk of injury rate because you're not constantly trying to push yourself on really poor recovery. Or it's going to help you actually get a better stimulus, a better intended adaptation out of your lifting or out of your harder intensity cardio sessions because you're actually able to go harder when it counts. Especially in this time of life, in midlife, when things can be more hectic and more stressful. So the practical summary of this podcast episode is to plan your strength days. In this example, we used 2. That was the anchor. The next step was to fill in around those strength days with your cardio. And we talked about what that could look like, mostly moderate intensity with a sprinkling of higher intensity to round it out. Alternate harder days with easier to more moderate days. And number 4 is to auto-regulate, to use recovery observations, things like rate of perceived exertion, to adjust your effort level when you're actually training, to think about things like your sleep quality and duration, how sore you are, your energy levels, potentially other data that you're receiving from, for example, a recovery tracker, but to use those observations, whether they're numbers or more qualitative observations, to adjust and nudge the intensity a little bit up or a little bit down. Feeling great? Awesome. Go a little bit harder. Feeling not so great? Pull that intensity back a little bit. That will allow you to keep your training week roughly intact so that you have something consistent and reliable around which to plan other things. And you know that you have that time set aside for your training, but also you give yourself the flexibility, the latitude to make things harder or a little bit easier based on how you feel. And my most successful lifters, the people who get the best results over time, they're still lifting with me 3+ years later, are the ones who have really embraced this idea that there is not perfection, that they don't have to go to level 1000 every day, that they're going to learn to ride the wave, to adjust as necessary, and that ultimately the biggest marker of their success is their ability to keep progressing over the long haul, not just feeling like they did 4 weeks of perfect workouts. Ultimately, when you learn to ride this wave of intensity, and sometimes that means planning in advance, and sometimes it means also adjusting on the fly based on how you feel in this moment, that instead of trying to crush every session, you're going to walk away feeling stronger, improving over time, and feeling less burned out and wrung out by your training. Learning to ride the wave is one of the best skill sets that you can learn and practice when you're in midlife and trying to improve your fitness. A couple of things before we hop off. First, if you're enjoying the podcast, finding value from it, then maybe you'll consider hitting the subscribe button. This is going to help other people find out about the podcast. And of course, it is 100% free for you. So thanks for helping me out with that. And if you know it's time to get a lifting program that gives you the structure, but also the flexibility so you see better progress over time, then check out Strong with Steph. Go to stephgaudreau.com/workout. Put your name and email in there, and I will send you a 7-day trial of the Strong with Steph program. I'd love to work with you inside of the program and see you really thrive with your lifting over 40. All right, that does it for this episode of Strong with Steph. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And until next time, stay strong.